Under the bright lights of Hollywood, where everything looks perfect and eternal, there was a man whose smile seemed capable of lighting up any room. A wide, warm, almost childlike smile. A smile that danced with his body, that sang along with his voice. That man was Dick Van Dyke. To the world, he was the very embodiment of joy, a symbol of lightness, talent, and charisma. An artist who made millions laugh, dream, and believe that life could be simple and happy. But behind that famous smile, there was something no one saw. A heavy silence, a constant restlessness, a darkness that even the brightest spotlight could not reach. At his core, Dick Van Dyke was an extremely shy man, not the charming kind of shyness that looks endearing from the outside, but a paralyzing, suffocating shyness that tightened his chest and froze his voice. In a world built on lavish parties, glamorous premieres, interviews, endless social gatherings, and superficial conversations, he felt out of place, small, invisible. Every new event was an emotional challenge, every greeting an enormous effort, every conversation with a stranger a minefield. While everyone else saw confidence, he felt fear. While everyone else heard laughter, he heard his own heart racing. While everyone else celebrated, he was simply surviving. He didn't know how to fit in. He didn't know how to be spontaneous in that environment. And then, almost without realizing it, he found something that seemed like a simple solution. Something accepted, something common, something everyone used. Alcohol. At first it was innocent, a drink before a party, a glass to relax, a shot to calm the nerves, and it worked. With just one sip, something shifted inside him. The tension eased, his mind slowed, fear stepped back, words began to flow more easily, laughter came without effort. With a drink in his hand, Dick Van Dyke could be social. He could talk, he could joke, he could appear confident. For the first time, he felt like he could be himself. Or at least a version of himself the world accepted. I discovered that if I had a drink, it loosened me up, he would confess many years later with painful honesty. The barriers came down, and I became very sociable. That's what started it. The problem is that what begins as relief rarely warns you when it's about to become dependence. What was once just a social crutch in his 30s began to seep into other areas of his life. The drink at parties became drinks at home, 1 to relax after work, 2 to sleep better, 3 to quiet the mind, 4 to forget the exhaustion, the pressure, the insecurities. Without realizing it, he was no longer drinking just to face the outside world. He was drinking to survive the inner one. Alcohol stopped being an occasional companion and became a constant presence. It was there on good days and especially on bad ones. It was there when the applause faded, when the studio emptied, when the silence of night brought everything to the surface that he tried so hard not to feel. For 7 years, the drinking was heavy. Then it stretched into a decade, then 2. 25 years. 25 years of his life slowly draining to the bottom of a glass. 25 years in which a public smile hid a private battle. 25 years in which performed joy masked a deep emptiness. And the most frightening part of all, he didn't realize when it happened. There was no clear moment, no alarm, no visible line between control and dependence. When did the drink stop being a choice and become a necessity? When did the solution turn into a prison? When did the support become a shackle? When did the man who made the world smile begin to lose himself? This is the story no one saw, the story behind the mask, the beginning of the darkness.
The abyss. Success does not protect you from demons. In fact, more often than not, it feeds them. In the eyes of the world, Dick Van Dyke was at the absolute peak of his career. His success shone like few others in Hollywood. He starred in beloved television shows, became a constant presence in American homes, danced with Julie Andrews in Mary Poppins, and made children and adults laugh around the world. His name was synonymous with joy, lightness, and hope. Wherever he appeared, smiles followed. But that was only the stage, only the facade. At home, when the cameras stopped rolling, when the costume came off and silence replaced applause, a different man emerged. A tired body, a confused mind, a heavy heart. Alcohol, which once felt like support, had become a constant demand. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the happy drunk began to disappear. That loose, outgoing, seemingly carefree man gave way to something much darker. An angry drunk, an irritable man, a deeply unhappy man. Small frustrations turned into explosions, silences turned into tension, laughter no longer came easily. And then depression arrived. It didn't come with warning. It didn't arrive loudly. It crept in quietly, like a shadow that grows throughout the day until it covers everything. Little by little, it suffocated what was still good. It erased pleasure from achievements. It stole meaning from victories. Nothing felt like enough. Nothing felt real. Nothing seemed to last. His marriage to Margie Willett began to crumble under that invisible weight. While Dick was pulled deeper into the glamorous life of a Hollywood star, parties, commitments, travel, constant attention, Margie rejected that world entirely. She didn't want the spotlight. She didn't want the artificial pace. She didn't want the loneliness that came with fame. They began living in opposite realities, separated not only by routine, but by a pain neither of them knew how to name. And so, each sought anesthesia wherever they could. Dick turned even more to alcohol. Margie sought refuge in prescription medications. Two different paths, the same desperate attempt to escape pain. The house became heavy. Love still existed, but it was buried beneath frustrations, resentments, and silences that lasted too long. One person's pain mirrored the other's like a cruel reflection, showing only what no one wanted to see. Years later, Dick would speak about that period with brutal honesty. "I was in serious trouble," he said. "You get suicidal. You start thinking you just can't go on. It was terrible." The man who made millions smile couldn't find a single reason to smile when he was alone. And then came the moment that changed everything. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a public collapse. It was a silent and devastating moment. He looked at his 4 children. He saw their innocent faces, their eyes full of trust, children who depended on him not just to survive, but to learn what it meant to be an adult, what it meant to be a father, what it meant to be a man. And in that instant, the truth hit him like a punch. He was becoming his father. Dick's father, Loren Van Dyke, had been a talented musician, a sensitive man who played saxophone and clarinet in a jazz band. But life pushed him into a sales job he hated. Frustration piled up, depression deepened, and every night, despite the forced smile and the carefully polished shoes, Loren Van Dyke came home drunk. Dick knew this story well. He had lived it as a child. The emotional absence, the confusion, the silent fear. And now, with a knot in his stomach, he realized he was about to repeat the same story, just from the other side. History was repeating itself, and Dick Van Dyke knew if he didn't stop now, if he didn't break that cycle, his children would remember him exactly the way he remembered his father. It was there, at the deepest point of the abyss, that something broke, and at the same time, something was born. Enough. It was enough.
The turning point. In 1972, at 46 years old, Dick Van Dyke made the hardest decision of his life. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't made in a moment of euphoria. It was a choice made in silence, in utter exhaustion, when the pain could no longer be ignored. He admitted himself to a hospital for 3 weeks to face his addiction head-on. For the first time in more than 2 decades, he stopped running, stopped justifying, stopped pretending he was in control. There, far from the spotlight, far from public expectations, far from the image of the happy man, he allowed himself to be simply a broken man seeking help. There was nothing glamorous about that place. No red carpet, no makeup, costumes, or opening music. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't comfortable. There were no cameras, no applause, no standing ovations. There was only silence, rigid routines, honest looks, and a man forced to face the monster he had fed for 25 years. Each day in that hospital was a confrontation with withdrawal, with guilt, with memories he had drowned for years. Without alcohol to numb him, everything surfaced: old fears, buried shame, deep regret. But there is something powerful about hitting rock bottom. When you reach the lowest point, there is nowhere left to fall. And that's exactly where the ground stops being a fall and becomes a foundation. During those 3 weeks, something finally clicked, an understanding that would change his life forever. Dick realized that alcoholism was not a moral failure, not weakness of character, not a lack of discipline or maturity. It was a disease, a real, devastating physical addiction, powerful as heroin, an enemy that hijacks both body and mind. And admitting it, accepting that truth without shame, was the first genuine step toward freedom. Later, he would put it into simple, direct words. "It's a physical disease," he said. "It has nothing to do with being immature enough not to drink too much. It's a real addiction." That understanding changed everything. Suddenly, he wasn't a failure. He wasn't weak. He wasn't irreparably broken. He was sick, and sickness can be treated. That shift in perspective was liberating. For the first time in years, Dick Van Dyke felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not exaggerated or naive hope,
but quiet, solid, real hope. When he left the hospital 3 weeks later, he was sober. His body was free of alcohol. His mind, still fragile, began to clear. But sobriety was not a trophy. It wasn't an automatic happy ending. It was just the beginning. The real work was only starting, staying sober, one day at a time, rebuilding his life step by step, earning back lost trust, learning to feel emotions without anesthesia, becoming the father his children needed, the husband he wanted to be, the man he could respect in the mirror. That would take years. It would require discipline, humility, daily courage. And without a doubt, it would be the hardest role Dick Van Dyke ever played. But something was different now. For the first time in 25 years, he wasn't running, he wasn't hiding, he wasn't numb. For the first time in 25 years, Dick Van Dyke was free. The transformation. Sobriety didn't just save Dick Van Dyke's life. It revealed who he was truly meant to be. When alcohol left the picture, something far greater took its place. Clarity. For the first time in decades, Dick could look at himself without fog, without anesthesia, without escape. And what he found wasn't an empty man. It was a man full of possibilities that had been dormant for years. The years after 1972 became a masterclass in resilience. Nothing happened overnight. The rebuilding was slow, patient, made of small steps. He reconnected with his children, rebuilding bonds weakened by silence and emotional absence. Difficult conversations were faced, apologies were made, trust was restored, not with words, but with consistency. At the same time, Dick kept working, and a powerful truth emerged. The talent was never in the alcohol. The brilliance never came from the drink. His creativity, energy, and charisma existed on their own. He proved to the world and to himself that he didn't need alcohol to be extraordinary. But perhaps the bravest step of all was this. Dick Van Dyke chose to speak at a time when addiction was treated as shameful, when people hid their struggles behind closed doors and forced smiles. He stood before the public and said with disarming honesty, "I was an alcoholic and I sought help." Those words had a profound impact. Something shifted in the air. People who felt alone felt seen. People who believed they were broken began to feel hope. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in, from men, from women, from entire families. Letters from people across the country, people too ashamed to admit they had a problem, people who had never said it out loud before, people who, for the first time, found the courage to seek help because someone they admired had the courage to be vulnerable. I get a lot of letters from people who say that suddenly they weren't ashamed anymore to admit they had a drinking problem and they sought help, Dick once shared, and I'm very proud of that. His vulnerability became his greatest strength. What he once hid was now saving lives. His story stopped being just about personal recovery. It became a beacon, a steady light for those still drowning in the same darkness he had escaped. But Dick Van Dyke didn't stop there. In 1978, he helped establish the Dick Van Dyke Addiction Treatment Center, a place created not only to treat substance abuse, but also mental health, a place where people could find help without judgment, a place where access to treatment didn't depend on the ability to pay. From his pain came purpose. From his fall came service. From his darkness came light for countless others. And as the decades passed, something truly remarkable happened. Dick Van Dyke didn't just survive, he thrived. He kept dancing with the same joy that made him famous. He kept singing, acting, enchanting new generations. Sobriety didn't diminish him, it expanded him. He allowed himself to love again, marrying Arlene Silver at 86, proving that it's never too late to begin again, never too late to choose happiness. He discovered something essential. Life after addiction isn't just about existing. It's about presence. It's about truth. It's about fully living with your feet on the ground and your heart wide open. And yet, the greatest transformation was still to come.
100 years of a full life. December 13th, 2025. Dick Van Dyke turned 100 years old. 100 years. A number that, for many, represents the end of the road, a milestone often associated with fragility, limitation, a slow farewell to life. But with Dick Van Dyke, that number means the exact opposite. Because here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. At 100 years old, Dick Van Dyke doesn't just exist, he dances. He doesn't just survive, he thrives. He doesn't just remember better days, he is living his best days right now. While many slow down, he quickens the heart. While many withdraw, he moves. While many give up, he celebrates. 3 times a week, this 100-year-old man goes to the gym, not as a symbol, not as a spectacle, but as a commitment to life. He does sit-ups, leg presses, full-body workouts. He strengthens muscles, balance, breath. And then comes the most beautiful part of all. Between machines, he doesn't walk, he dances, with lightness, with joy, with presence. Most of my humming and singing happens while I'm walking from one machine to another, he says, with the same infectious smile that won hearts more than 7 decades ago. That smile isn't performance, it's gratitude in motion. At 98, Dick Van Dyke won an Emmy, becoming the oldest daytime Emmy winner in history. At 99, he appeared in a Coldplay music video, dancing alongside his family, bridging generations with the same energy that made him timeless. At 100, he is still strong, still curious, still present, still inspiring millions. His wife, Arlene Silver, 46 years younger, calls him the perfect human being, and it's easy to see why. They dance together at home, they laugh together, they share small moments that, when added up, form an extraordinary life. They live fully, completely, joyfully. When asked about the secret to his longevity, Dick Van Dyke doesn't hesitate. He's direct, honest, simple. I got rid of the booze and the cigarettes and all that stuff, which is probably why I'm still here. But the truth goes deeper than that. It's about choosing life over darkness, about facing your demons instead of running from them, about taking responsibility for your future, about understanding that transformation has no expiration date.
It can happen at 20, at 46, at 60, or at 96. 100 years isn't enough, Dick says today. You want to live more, which I plan to do. Think about that. A man who once contemplated ending his life because of addiction now says that 100 years is not enough. That's not just survival, that's victory. So what's the lesson here? What can we learn from this man who danced through pain, collapse, rebuilding, and time? It's simple and powerful. It's never too late. Never too late to change. Never too late to seek help. Never too late to break free. Never too late to become who you were meant to be. Never too late to find joy, purpose, and meaning. Dick Van Dyke is living proof that your past does not define your future, that your age does not limit your potential, and that your darkest moments can become the foundation of your greatest triumphs. As Dick himself says, keep moving, keep going, keep trying, keep dancing, keep living, keep fighting. Because life, real, beautiful, full life, is waiting on the other side of that first brave step. Dick Van Dyke took that step at 46, and today, at 100, he's still dancing. And you? What's holding you back?
Subscribe to the channel because we'll have new videos every day until you reach your goal. You are capable.